really good understanding of organic chemistry, and we've done a one-day lecture on organic chemistry. Now we're going to do a one-day lecture on biochemistry, and I may or may not break this up into 2 videos. So traditionally biochem is a one-year course, and of course in Chem 111 we're just doing an overview. A lot of things we've talked about are going to come into play here. All right, so biochemistry is defined as the chemistry of living things, and typically any chemical reactions that are biologically relevant. And there's a lot of overlap with molecular biology and with cell biology and things like that. You can't really take biology courses and not do at least a little bit of biochemistry. So I'm going to do this is a brief overview. I'll make it very clear what I want you to be able to do. Basically, actually, I'll tell you right now, what I want you to be able to do is recognize the types of molecules, recognize that this is a protein, this is a fat, things like that. You should know what their roles are in living things. Just in general, what they're made of. Obviously, you know, you can't do much in a couple of short lectures, one short lecture. All right, so there's 4 major types of biomolecules, and they are proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. And the major roles, this is something I definitely want you to know. Proteins, all the enzymes in your body, enzymes are biological catalysts, so they help reactions take place. They're connective tissue. A lot of hormones are made of proteins. So the enzymes that are involved in digestion of food, things like that. Carbohydrates are for energy and energy storage, although they do have a structural role. Plants have a lot of carbohydrate. The biggest biomolecule in the world, or most common biomolecule, is plant cell walls, but mostly energy and energy storage. Nucleic acids are information transfer, and lipids are also energy storage, insulation, cell membranes, and also hormones. And we'll talk about each of these briefly. All right, so let's start with one other concept. Macromolecules or polymers. So macro, again, this is where we talked very early in the semester about understanding prefixes and things like that. So macro means really big. So macromolecules are really big molecules. All right, most biomolecules are polymers. So a polymer is, but again, poly means many, mer is just a body, like isomer. So poly means many. So a polymer, a good example would be like beads on a string. All right, so a polymer is just there's a repeating unit, and they're just the same thing over and over again. They're what are called homopolymers, which is it's the same molecule over and over again. Heteropolymers, so let's say the beads were blue, red, yellow, that would be a heteropolymer. But you see patterns of repeating units. 3 of the 4 biomolecules are polymers. Lipids are not polymers. And the polymers are held together by covalent bonds. So if these are 2 molecules in the polymer, 2 of the monomers, this would be held together by a covalent bond. And you'll see as we go through this. All right, so let's start with what the monomers are, So proteins are a polymer of amino acids. Carbohydrates are polymers of monosaccharides. Polysaccharides, see, monosaccharide. The joke is biochemists can only count to 3. We go mono, di, tri, then we go oligo, poly. So 1, 2, 3, some, many. Nucleic acids are polymers of nucleotides, and as I said, lipids are not polymers. All right. Another thing that's really important to understand is biomolecules are actually organic molecules. They're just organic molecules that are used biochemically. And the most important functional groups in biochemistry are amines, carboxylic acids, aldehydes, alcohols. There are also esters. There's some other ones, but these are the biggies. And all the organic chemistry reactions that organic chemistry does, biochemistry does them. Actually, biochemical reactions are relatively simple reactions. Of course, we didn't go through organic chemistry reactions, and we won't, but this is the idea. Right? That's why, if you're going to go to medical school, you're going into a medical field, you have to take a biochemistry course because you need to understand stuff. All right, let's start with amino acids and proteins. So these things basically do all of the work. All right, amino acids, so here's some terminology, amino like amine, acid like acid. So an amino acid literally has an amine, we talked about this, and an acid. So remember the carboxylic acid functional group? Good, wouldn't be bad to review your organic chemistry slides. Okay, and an amino group. Typically, an amino acid has an amino group, a carbon, and a carboxylic acid. That would be an amino acid. The rest of the molecule, this is where the amino acids differ. They're frequently called alpha amino acids because if you count, this is the carbon with the double bond to the oxygen, then there's 1, 2, 3, the alpha carbon. Sometimes we use Greek letters. There's 20, excuse me, essential amino acids. They're called essential because there's no way to get them except from your diet, so they're dietarily essential. You have to eat them, so to speak. And if you look, you can see there's the N, carbon, and then the acid. N, carbon, acid. N, carbon, acid. This one's written differently, but this is the R group. Okay, this is the R group. This is the R group. But there's N, right? N, and then the carbon, and then the acid, and then the R group. They're just written sideways. So that's why the N, the carbon, this is the R group. Okay, there are various types of them, but these are they're classified a lot of different ways. There's more than 20 in living things, but these are the 20 that you can only get dietarily. When amino acids polymerize, they form proteins, and then that's when you get a polypeptide chain, so a long chain. And this is the reaction. It's called a condensation reaction. So the carboxylic acid functional group of one amino acid reacts with the amino functional group, and it's a condensation because you form water. You see I got an H and an OH. This is called a peptide bond. Okay, a molecule of water is removed. Interestingly, when proteins are broken down, it's the reverse of the reaction. So we talked when we were discussing water about water being involved in a lot of the chemical reactions that your body does. When you break down protein, you put the water back in. So you use water to break the bond. It's called a hydrolysis, lysis to break apart, right? Most proteins are very long chains of amino acids. They can be hundreds of amino acids. So this would be a polypeptide, many peptides. And you can see this is an amino acid right here, N, C, and then, actually this isn't really, oh yeah, here it is. They're backwards, it's going backwards, it's going the wrong way. Okay, N, C, and the carbon, right? N, C, carbon double bond oxygen, N, C, carbon double bond oxygen, N, C, carbon double bond. The reason I said backwards is I'm used to reading them the other way because typically we write them the opposite direction, but that's okay. It's either here or there. But you can see, you should be able to identify, here's an amino acid, here's an amino acid. So this is a polypeptide. This is an example of a polypeptide. So here you can see there's an amino acid right here. This is an amino acid. This is an amino acid. This is an amino acid. If I gave you a list, you might even be able to identify them. This is tyrosine, glycine, phenylalanine, and isoleucine. Right? But if you had a list, you could identify them. Now, when you get a really, really long chain, they will fold back on themselves, and you get all sorts of interesting structures that will interact with each other. It's intermolecular forces, and it folds back on itself and forms a very, very complicated three-dimensional shape. That shape dictates the function. And why do they fold back on themselves? This is where it interacts with the solvent. What's the solvent in a living system? Think about it. Right, it's water, so it interacts with water. If you back up, some of these side chains like this, all carbons, very nonpolar, so they're not going to want to be around water, so they're going to like dissolves like. Those concepts come into play. So typically in the aqueous part, these side chains here would be interacting with water. The ones in the middle would be interacting with nonpolar stuff. All that dictates the shapes that they form, and it gets very complicated, and we just don't have the time in Chem 111 to go through all of the detail. But I know you guys are going to be so fascinated by this that in a couple semesters you'll be in a biochemistry class. Just for kicks, this is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that carries oxygen in your blood. All right, so to summarize proteins, proteins do a lot of the work. They're involved in a lot of the chemical reactions that your body does. All right, that's what they do. They're also structural proteins like connective tissue, like collagen and muscle. Even the skin has a lot of protein in it. And what they are structurally is they're a polymer of amino acids. You should be able to recognize what an amino acid is. If I show you a structure, you should say, oh yes, of course, that's a protein. All right, I'm going to stop it here for video number 1, and then we'll do a second video, at least probably 1 or 2 more. Get out of this.